human housefly. Seth Brundle was the ultimate genius until a single housefly turned his life into a living nightmare. As a brilliant physicist, he successfully created telepods that could dismantle and rebuild matter. But during a solo test, he didn't realize a fly had slipped into the pod with him. The computer couldn't separate them, so it fused their DNA at a molecular level, creating something entirely new. At first, Seth felt like a human with superpowers, possessing superhuman strength and endless energy. But soon, the fly DNA began to aggressively delete his humanity. His fingernails fell out, his teeth rotted in his gums, and his skin turned into a mottled, diseased shell that he eventually began to slough off in chunks. As the transformation reaches its peak, he is no longer Seth, but a nightmare known as Brundlefly, a massive, multi-limbed insectoid mutant that has lost all human logic. In a desperate attempt to be whole again, he tries to use the pods to fuse himself with his pregnant girlfriend, but the process goes horribly wrong. Instead, he accidentally merges with the heavy metal parts of the teleporter itself. He emerges from the pod as a dying cyborg monster of mangled flesh and chrome, crawling toward her and silently begging for a mercy kill via shotgun. Flesh duplicating. Living under the brutal spotlight of Hollywood can make a person do the unthinkable to stay young. This was the reality for Elizabeth Sparkle, a fitness icon fired from her show on her 50th birthday for no longer being beautiful. Desperate to stay relevant, she uses a black market procedure called the substance, which is also the name of this movie. After injecting a neon liquid, her body literally splits down the spine to birth a younger, perfect version of herself named Sue. But there is a rule which must be strictly followed. They must swap every 7 days. The nightmare begins when Sue starts stealing time, draining Elizabeth's life force to stay young. This causes Elizabeth's original body to rot. Her fingers turn into gnarled claws, and her skin becomes a sagging mess as her humanity is sucked dry. In a panicked attempt to fix the damage, Elizabeth injects more fluid, causing her DNA to collapse into a grotesque, multi-limbed mass of tumors. What's left of her is an inside-out monster that crashes a live broadcast to regain the audience's love. Instead of a standing ovation, she explodes, covering the crowd in blood. The meat pile. Most horror movies give you a quick transformation, but Slither, which was directed by James Gunn, the man behind the Guardians trilogy and Superman, turns this movie into a slow, stomach-turning evolution. It begins when Grant finds a strange, pulsating egg in the woods. When he gets too close, a needle-like stinger shoots into his chest, planting an extraterrestrial seed inside him. Grant doesn't turn into a monster instantly. Instead, it starts with a craving for raw meat. He begins clearing out the local butcher shops, moves on to neighborhood pets, and eventually starts hunting the townspeople. His skin becomes oily and translucent, and his personality turns entirely predatory. As the parasite takes hold, Grant's human form begins to fail. His body bloats to impossible proportions, splitting his skin and revealing a mass of writhing purple tentacles. He is no longer an individual. He is just a biological hive now. He kidnaps a local woman and force-feeds her until she expands into a giant stationary breeder that eventually explodes, releasing thousands of red, brain-eating slugs into the town. By the final act, Grant has merged with his victims. He becomes a massive, multi-limbed mountain of flesh, a literal meat pile that fills an entire basement. Because he shares a single consciousness with everyone he has infected, he is essentially a one-man army. The nightmare only ends when Grant is blown apart with a propane tank. Unlike other monsters, Grant stayed conscious enough to remember his old life, making his transformation as tragic as it was disgusting. Melting Man. Darkman is the story of Peyton Westlake, a scientist who was on the brink of a medical breakthrough with synthetic skin. His life was destroyed when mobsters attacked his lab, doused him in acid, and triggered a massive explosion that threw his body into the river. He was found and taken to a hospital as an unidentified burn victim, where doctors performed a radical experiment on him to stop his agonizing pain. They performed a procedure called a spinothalamic tractotomy, which severed the sensory nerves in his brain. This meant he could no longer feel any physical sensation, but it also flooded his body with adrenaline, giving him uncontrollable rage and superhuman strength. The horror of his new life is that he is a man who can feel nothing but anger. He uses his synthetic skin technology to rebuild his face, but the material is unstable and melts after exactly 99 minutes of exposure to light. He spends his existence in a race against time, trying to look human long enough to reconnect with his girlfriend, only to have his face literally dissolve off his skull every time he gets close to her. By the end of the movie, the psychological damage is total. After hunting down the men who destroyed him, Peyton realizes that the man he used to be died in that explosion. He can't feel a hug, and he can't maintain a human face. He chooses to disappear into the city, wearing a mask and a trench coat, finally accepting who he has become. Human walrus. Imagine waking up to find that your legs have been amputated, and your arms have been sewn to your ribs, all because you met the wrong person for a podcast interview. This is exactly what happened to Wallace Brighton in the movie Tusk. Wallace was an arrogant guy who traveled to Canada looking for a weird story, only to be drugged by a man named Howard Howe. Howard was a retired sailor who was obsessed with a walrus that had saved his life years ago, and he decided to use Wallace as the raw material to bring that creature back to life. The transformation is one of the most disgusting things ever put on film. Howard performed a series of horrific surgeries to turn Wallace into a biological patchwork. He used Wallace's own leg bones to create tusks and stitched him into a heavy, crude suit made of human skin. Wallace was forced to live in a backyard pool, eating raw fish and barking like an animal while his humanity was cut away piece by piece. The man Wallace used to be is completely gone by the time his friends finally track him down. Instead of a person to rescue, they find a creature that has lost its mind, unable to speak and responding only with animalistic grunts. He is left to live out his days in a wildlife sanctuary, trapped forever in a suit of scarred skin, crying as he finally accepts his life as a walrus. Alienoid human prawn. It all started with a simple eviction notice to aliens in a dirty South African slum. A nervous, mid-level bureaucrat named Vickers van der Merwe was just trying to do his job when he accidentally sprayed himself with a mysterious black fluid hidden in an alien canister. At first, it looked like a standard infection spread by contact with an alien species, causing things like nosebleeds and a cough. But his body was actually rewriting its own DNA from the inside out. Everything started to fall apart when his fingernails fell off and his teeth loosened, eventually leading to his left arm transforming into a massive black alien claw, similar to the aliens shown in the movie. This combination of both alien and human traits made him a biological key, the only human capable of firing advanced alien weaponry. His own government stopped seeing him as a person and started seeing him as a lab rat they could harvest for parts. By the end of the story, the transformation is total. He loses his ability to speak, and his human face completely shifts into the form of a prawn. The movie ends on a heartbreaking note, showing him as a full alien living in the dirt. He spends his days making small metal flowers out of scrap metal to leave for his wife, a final sign that he is still in there. Ancient Devil. The Exorcist is the story of Regan McNeil, a sweet, innocent 12-year-old girl. It started with a few strange noises in the attic and a Ouija board. At first, her mother thought it was a medical crisis, putting Regan through hospital tests to find a brain lesion or a psychological cause for her sudden foul-mouthed outbursts and bizarre behavior. But as the girl's strength became superhuman and her actions turned violent, the doctors couldn't do anything. The true horror is the systematic rotting of a child's body as it becomes a vessel for an ancient devil. The physical transformation is a slow-motion nightmare. Regan's skin turns a sickly, bruised gray, covered in self-inflicted wounds and "help me" messages that rise up like welts on her skin. Her voice changes into a demonic snarl, and her body begins to perform bone-snapping feats, like the infamous scene where she crawls down the stairs backward like a spider. At this point, she is a puppet made of cracked flesh and filth. The story culminates in a brutal, exhausting battle for her soul. Through the ritual of exorcism, the demon is finally forced out, but at a devastating cost. Both priests lose their lives to save her, and while Regan eventually returns to her normal self, she is left with no memory of the atrocities her body committed. And here's a fun fact. To this day, when adjusted for inflation, The Exorcist remains the highest-grossing horror movie of all time. From bone-snapping curses to the new flesh, these movies prove that some changes are a total death sentence. Which of these transformations messed you up the most? Let me know in the comments.